All right, we're calling to order the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission meeting for March 9th, 2023. And I'm going to make a roll call of voting members right now. Keith Allgood.
Present.
Tony Gross.
Here.
Mike Hargis.
Here.
Lauren Hill.
Here.
Mike Paddock is me here. Chuck Slater is absent. Marie Spafford.
Here.
Bob Stoller.
Here.
And Tony Thompson, our newest member.
Here.
Hello, Tony, and welcome to the Planning Commission. We appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Non-voting staff, Sharon Armstrong.
Here.
And Dan Smola, is he here at this meeting?
not.
Okay. And then we have the ex officio attendees, the city manager of Kingston Springs, John Lawless.
Here.
And Martha Brooke Perry is the city attorney. She's not here. Okay, so we have a quorum. And you all have the February 9th commission meeting minutes before you. Do we have a motion to approve those?
So moved. Second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, those meeting minutes are approved. And now you have this agenda before you. Do we have a motion to approve this agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, is there anything we have to amend? Okay. All right, so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? All right, this agenda is approved. Now we're at the community input section, which each person who wants to speak has 3 minutes. If they want to speak on one of our regular agenda items. Do we have anybody here who wants to speak? Yes, sir. If you could come up and state your name and address, and I'll kick my timer off.
I'll be brief. I'm Scott Summers.
Okay?
I'm here monthly. 795 South Harpeth Road. You're the newest member. Has anybody driven over there yet and seen it? Thank you. I mean, it's bad. I mean, between my creek and this, it's oh golly, it just upsets me badly. The golf club could be doing a lot better. My creek is, periodically it's better, but something broke again last time, and I don't know what it was, but I mean, the mud continues to flow, and this last little stint I was without power for 5 days. It was just fine, except right down there where they put the fairway in. This little stretch of South Harpeth down through there. So it's pretty evident. If you went over there and looked, the rest of the road's pretty normal, okay. But they're just running amok over there, and I'm just tired of it. But I'm sure it was a catastrophic event they didn't plan for. But it's just continues and continues, and I just wish something better could occur. It's sad to me. Seems like nothing really changes. So I'm here every month, and will continue to do so. Feel free to reach out to me if you want. But I just wish some things could be better. So,
Thank you.
you know, guys, come on. Ready.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak during community input? Okay, so community input is now closed. All right. The next item, it said declaration of conflicts, and this is something that the last approved bylaws, I believe, were 2001 with an amendment in 2018. Okay. And in those bylaws, there was specific language on declaration of conflicts of interest. So I put that in there just so we all could just see it as it stands in our bylaws right now. So it says, in the event that any member shall have a personal interest of any kind in the matter, then before the Kingston Springs Municipal Regional Planning Commission, he or she shall disclose his or her interest and be disqualified from voting upon the matter. So it's very specific on that. And it says the secretary shall show report in the minutes that no vote was cast by such member. So just put that in there just to get it back in front of us, because it's more specific than I had realized. So that's it. Or anything else that we need to cover on that? Just wanted to make sure we saw it.
No, sir.
It was originally in the bylaws from the 1990s when it was first formed as a
Okay.
planning commission, so it's been in there all of that time, and then through the last revision it got omitted. It's just been put back in.
But the last proposed revision, not the last
Right.
amendment that was
That's
approved?
correct.
Okay, so nothing formal, just it was sitting, yeah, okay.
That's correct.
Okay, so next, to old business, 9A, Ellerslie Performance Bond and PUD Agreement update.
Yes, sir. Briefly, the PUD agreement has been officially signed by all parties and is ready to go. John and I will have a meeting with the developer and his attorney sometime in the next week or so in order to start that process of grading that needs to occur on the property behind the finished structure. The grading plan's been previously approved by the planning commission, and the path forward's been previously approved. So we'll sit down with him, he requested the meeting, we'll accommodate that.
Okay, any questions on that for Sharon? Okay. Next item, old business, 9B, the Golf Club of DBI LLC. Has two parts. One is an inspection report from March 2nd site inspection, and second part is stop work order issued 28 Feb. 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I included some inspection reports in your packet. There were 3 additional ones that I received this afternoon that are not in your packet. They all reflect the same thing. There were insufficient controls in areas on site. After the inspection that I did on March the 9th, I believe, no, March, last Friday.
Today's the 9th.
Yeah,
March
so
2nd.
it's
Friday
been a
was-
long week. But last Friday I did an inspection, and after that I issued a formal stop work because there were failures that were significant on site. Since then, we had another rain, another inspection was done. I did mine on Thursday. On Friday, my husband accommodated me and went over and took the photographs and did the inspection for me because I was not feeling well. That resulted in, again, a series of failures in one particular area where the construction entrances and the concrete road going up to the top of the hill. There was a fairly significant failure there. There was mud, again, in the creek, dirt in the creek. So at that point, a formal stop was issued. I met with them, sat down with the EPSC monitor, and I also met with Blake, who is the soil and erosion control person assigned to the project. We discussed possible causes, road site. They have since submitted a list that's in your packet as a separate document of things they intend to implement over the next few days in order to address the issues on the site and to stop work. At this point, after the storm, we went back over today to look again before the meeting tonight. There were a number of trees that were downed in that area. There were trees downed all over the community. There was significant loss of trees everywhere from south central Kentucky all the way through to Murfreesboro. So it was an 80-mile-per-hour storm, straight line, in places. So trees are going to fall. But this afternoon I did observe a concentration of trees in a particular area above where the earthwork was taking place. So that concentration of trees has been removed from the road. It is my understanding from speaking to Blake today that the golf club is working with the 2 property owners that were affected. Mr. Gill, whose farm is directly adjacent to the creek that Mr. Summers lives or owns property adjacent to, where the 4 culverts are that are in the road that convey water from the site to the Harpeth River. The TDAC issued a permit for it. So they're working with Mr. Gill to remove that, and it's my understanding that Mr. Rose's husband began removal of trees down at their location, and that they have met with her and or her husband as well, and they're working with them to resolve the removal of the rest of the trees. They asked permission today to burn some of the debris from the trees. I don't have any heartburn at all with that. There's plenty of area on their site to do that. But I did advise them that they will need to get a state burn permit if one's required at this time of year, and also let me know when they're going to start burning so that we can inform the fire chief so that he doesn't get 9 million calls and not know what's going on the site. So you can see in front of you in the packet the things that they have proposed to do to stabilize the site. As always, there is the question of whether or not they can continue other work at this point until some of these are implemented. Staff recommendation would be to leave the stop in place. There's nothing on the agenda for you to vote on. While we understand the compromise to the project itself for the stoppage, we also understand the compromise to adjacent property owners and the impact to the road. During the storm, the road was for a period of time impassable for several residents because the trees lay across the road. And until that could be cleared, it created kind of a challenge for emergency services if one was needed. So at this particular point, I want them to focus their efforts on that particular area where the concrete road goes up between the stored debris pile and the pile of fresh dirt that was not controlled at that time that I visited the site on Thursday. I want them to focus their efforts on getting that contained because ultimately the goal is to keep the mud out of the creek, the dirt out of the creek, and to not cause the water to flow onto other people's property. Those are the two primary goals of our permits. So this is simply informational for you tonight. And I will share with you in the morning, as soon as I can get back to the computer, the additional 3 EPSC reports that were done by their site monitor that show the failure of controls. So I believe that they are diligent in addressing this. I met for probably an hour and a half with Blake, who's assigned to, he is the project manager for soil erosion and control. It's my understanding, and I will ask your discretion, if somebody from the audience could help me with this. It's my understanding that the earthwork that's going on is being done by a separate contractor than the soil and erosion control work. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I see you nodding your head.
Yes,
Thank you
ma'am.
very much, Blake, for asking that. So it's my understanding that Civil Constructors is doing the site work, the dirt work, the earth work on the project. And what I observed was 13 to 18 tandem, triple tandem axle dump trucks full of dirt that had been deposited in that area. And on the other side, there was some debris that had been pushed up in that area because they're trying to create kind of gentle sloping in that area. But at that time, there was no soil and erosion control around any of that deposited earth. I believe that led to the failure. In addition, they had some tree falls during the storm in some areas that may have contributed in some way to that. Also, they did state that they would begin to remove debris piles, stored materials that was proposed for the Golf Club of Tennessee from the location adjacent to the culvert pipes that are 4 deep across the road. The best conveyance of water is in that location for the creek, that they would begin to remove that to an interior location on the site, which will help to reduce some of that pile up on either side of the concrete road that runs straight down South Park. Any questions so far? Okay, so that's my update.
Were you gonna-
So I was just gonna ask, was that on B1 and 2? Was that,
Yes.
so that was both of those? And just to understand, because we have, I believe, some representatives also from the golf club here. Item C1, is that
Item
the
C-
same?
It is. They are all the same. We leave these as standing items on the agenda and have since the project began, so that we don't have to regenerate the agenda every month. So C1 and D1 were requests for stop work permits, and as always, included in the report that you have from the Golf Club of DBI, which is a separate document, the very last one, they have concerns, as they did last time, for the pump house project in order to get that up and running so that when they install sod, and they will be able to water it. At this point, right now, I don't think it's indicated to lift the stop for those other projects because I want them for the next few days during this period of intermittent heavy rain to focus all of their energy and personnel on stabilizing that soil and addressing the issues that we have.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I want to ask the commissioners, do you have questions about this for Sharon? And then after that, you may have some questions for the golf club who has some representation here. Any questions? It was simply an update, so we're
It
not
is an
being
update.
asked to make any recommendations. Well, I just wanted to make sure you have opportunity.
In addition to that, they have provided the information that's been requested from our engineer on their end for rain data and flow data. And they've also provided aerials and other information for Dan to look at to see if he can make some suggestions for stabilizing some of those areas. And I've been assured by Blake that they will make every effort to control these areas that are causing the failure.
Blake is the erosion control guy?
That is correct, and he is with us in the audience tonight. Blake, would you mind coming forward, if you don't mind? Would you come up? So-
And Blake, you are employed by the golf club, is that right?
No, sir. No, sir. I'm a contractor. My name is Blake Smith. I'm a project manager for a company called Heritage Links.
Okay,
And we are the golf course contractor and also are serving as their erosion control
okay.
maintenance group. Obviously now at this stage, it's had to expand to try to address some of these issues.
So, I mean, but ultimately, you're working with the contractor who is.
You're working with the civil constructors
I-
or whatever,
We're,
or general constructors?
so we're responsible for the maintenance within the golf course.
Right.
And then, due to the current conditions, we're coordinating with civil, with Bell, all of the other contractors that have work going on within all 4 projects to try to mitigate any of these issues and ultimately come up with enhancements to solve these problems.
Okay. So, questions for Sharon or for Blake at this point in time?
I have found them to be very responsive to our engineer and to our suggestions that we've made regarding the site itself. It's a very large scope. It's a very huge amount of soil that's being moved. Our engineer, when I discussed it with Dan last week after the inspection, I sent him the photographs and other things that he had requested, and he described it as somewhat playing whack-a-mole. You close the problem in one area, it diverts the water, and you're not sure where it's going to go until it surfaces again and begins to run. So the more efforts they put into stabilizing the backside of that project, coming off that hill, which is very steep, the more success they'll have at controlling the water. The water itself is clean, or was clean, for 3 inspections when it came off the site, and then we had this last link. Did you ever determine what was the source of the failure?
Not a single source, no.
Multiple sources.
No,
That's
there-
kind of what the same conclusion that Blake and I came to on the road site when I went on my last inspection for the entire site. And we saw multiple areas that could have contributed to it, but the piling of fresh earth that was uncontrolled in a particular area, in my opinion, contributed greatly to what occurred. So I have suggested, and I believe Dan will put it in his report to them, to require them to put in soil erosion measures before they dump fresh earth when you know a rain is coming. Because if you can get in front of it rather than behind it, you'll be able to stabilize it much quicker than responding to it in a pit of mud. So,
Agreed.
That was gonna be my question, is what proactively? Okay, we know we're gonna be moving earth, we know that these issues are gonna come up. Someone should be looking at it and be able
Please
to
come.
understand what the impact will be, and why aren't these things happening proactively?
There's a couple of items. Sam is here from Davy Group, who is a consultant that's been employed to give us recommendations as well from Golf Club of DBI. The short version to answer that is we've discussed and we have approved now some preventive measures that are more aggressive. If we don't get too much rain tonight, we're planning on starting hydroseed in some of these areas that 2 weeks ago there would have been stockpiles of colluvial soils that would be used for topsoil. Those have now been spread out and prepared for hydroseeding short of the erosion control. Getting seed going into this warmer time of the year, that's all going to protect and stabilize those slopes much better. In addition to that, on the area where the trees are fallen along the 14 hillside, that's a big area of concentration, one in collecting and getting rid of that tree debris, the deadfall, and also finishing that edge to the point where we can get a fescue sod rolled over that edge so that we have 30 to 40 foot from that crest down that is now stabilized with a good established sod. Those are some of the actions in between rain events right now that are occurring, or that we plan to occur in the next week or two.
I will add
That makes
to
sense.
that, as I did the site inspection today, I noted new silt fencing in the general area that I had concern from last week, from my visit last Friday. So between last Friday and now, they had a torrential rain, obviously. But since then, soil and erosion controls have been installed for a portion of that area. So they're battling the same issue I do when I do inspections, just from a different perspective. I'm wading in mud. So it's difficult for them to get some of these things in, which is not, and I want to make this clear because there's been some challenge to this. It's not an excuse. I'm not rendering an excuse for anybody. I'm simply making you aware of the realistic challenges that go to going down a sloped hill that's foot deep in mud to get something installed. You have to have hard ground to pound it in, you have to have something to stabilize it. So while I understand the challenges of having that done, if they will do that before they deposit large amounts of earth, we'll have less problems in the back end. That's one of the suggestions that we will make and require them to do in the future. So in addition to that, I again reiterated, we need the report every time it's done. That's the only way we have, other than physically stopping them from working, going on the site in order to ride the whole site. So if those are contributed, that makes life easier. The engineer said that he would have a report to me by close of business Monday, which is a pretty quick turnaround with the amount of data that he's getting. And he will have some further suggestions to relay to them. Any questions? so far?
One question is, the next 2 months, historically, is going to be probably even more rain than we've seen.
Rainy period, yes.
And so, you know, to Lauren's comment about proactive, you know, up until this point, it has seemed, you know, like very reactive. And so now we got 2 months of potentially pretty severe rain. And so besides sod,
Well, there are a lot of other measures going on. I mean, there's diamond sock filters, wattles, and there's two-stage erosion control that is a newer product that's TDOT approved. There's a number of measures that we're employing. Some of those are added additional fences. Some of it is also maintenance and replacement of older, worn-down fence that's only has a life expectancy of 6 to 9 months. So we have to look at some of those issues can be created there, just wear and tear and threadbare material. In addition to that, one of the key areas in this, I'd say the most exposed area where we don't have turf installed or sod previously and things like that, the Bermuda that's installed on 60% of the property is going to wake up. You know, with the temperature changes over this next 2 months, it's going to start waking up and start growing. That's going to be a huge asset. Then we concentrate more so on this last 40% to get it pushed through. There's 4 areas that there is substantial amounts of rock that will be going in to stabilize, you know, that red dirt surcharge material where we're pulling that back, getting rock in there as a base, and then getting the red dirt placed in and getting it finished off. Those are some of the things that they're going to be going on for the next 2 to 3 weeks to a large scale. And that, like I say, that's a combination of civil and ourselves primarily working on that portion of the golf course itself.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing too. I'm Sam Parrish. Do erosion sediment control, certified professional in erosion control and trained in the state. And so they offered, we're trying to help them kind of deal with some of these issues because frankly it is a super challenging site with steep slopes and area open above some of those steep slopes. And I guess I'll say a few things because I think it is important to be proactive and try and get these controls in place, and that's what we're trying to help them do. And I actually went out Friday after that rain event and sort of tried to track some of these areas where the problems were coming from, communicated that with Blake. There was 2 particular outfalls, areas that we've talked about and that they've subsequently addressed. And I think, I think Sharon made a really good point in terms of some of the challenges of getting to the outfalls. And I think whack-a-mole may not be exactly the right term because, you have specific outfalls where stormwater will be leaving a site, and the idea is that you're going to go monitor those outfalls and document that as part of your SWIP. And I think one thing that they have done a great job on is documenting those inspections, documenting their failures. What you see on a lot of sites is inspectors checking everything's okay. And I think what they have done correctly is document where they have problems, modify those controls, and try and fix the issues. And in some cases, that's frankly all you can do. I mean, construction sites are challenging. There's a stormwater permit for construction sites because it's a large area of disturbed earth, and turbid water is going to leave that site in some respects. I mean, it's going to happen. The question is, how bad is that water leaving the site? And so the idea is you want to have sediment control, so that's the silt fence, the socks, and other things. And you want to have erosion control, and that's the stabilization part of it, right? So that's what's difficult with some of these stop work orders is, they're grading, and under the construction general permit for the state of Tennessee, you have 14 days to stabilize that area while it's actively being graded. And if it hasn't been graded, then you stabilize it. That's what the permit says, right? And so that's what's difficult with some of these stop work orders is they're trying to get stuff graded so they can get stabilized, and sod is the best stabilization that you can put on a property. And so I think, when you look at the bridge and the irrigation projects, those are separate. Not really sure why they're involved in the stop work order, but regardless, I think it's important that that's continuing to happen, because the other part of it is to get the grading done so that they can get the stabilization in, and that's going to help them get the erosion and sediment controlled, prevent the turbid water discharges. And frankly, they're committed to doing that. We've talked with the owners. What I saw is apparently during some past events, your controls are designed for 2-year, 24-hour events. That's what the law requires. And they've had some outsized rain events, and that happens. That's Mother Nature, right? And that seems to be happening more often. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes releases do happen, and we've actually seen some deposits in the streams below the site. And actually that's one of our tasks, is to go and try and clean some of that up, and we've been engaged to do that as well. So that's my long spiel, but I think, what I wanted to get across is I think it is important to understand that they are super responsive. The SWIP is a living document. The idea is you find a problem, you fix that problem, you actually put another control in place to help remedy that problem. And that's one thing that has been documented over and over in their inspection reports.
Thank you. I do want to clarify.
Sure.
So under the stop work order, they can do any work to work on erosion control and sediment control. Is that correct?
I was about to ask permission to address those comments.
And so that would include grading for those purposes?
Grading that is necessary
Yes.
in order to stabilize that ground is absolutely permitted.
So to be clear, that statement that we're not allowing grading to work on sediment and erosion control is not a true statement. So I
It
just want to
hasn't
be
been
clear
the
on that.
case in any of the
Okay.
stops that have been issued either by us or by the the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. The goal is to stabilize the ground to make the problem go away. So in every single stop that we have issued, it's the other projects that are not associated
Right.
with this issue that have been stopped in order to refocus and redirect their energies towards this problem. So we have in no stop order told them they could not grade. If it contributes to the stabilization of soil and erosion control, they're allowed to do so. Any activity they need to do has been allowed at every juncture. I think where the failures are occurring is the movement of a great deal of earth in areas with steep slope and no containment. And once you move that, when it rains, it removes some of the soil and takes it down to the creek. And Mr. is it Smith?
Parish.
Parrish
Yep.
is correct in one regard, the ultimate goal is not to deposit the soil into the creek or the river.
Right.
As you saw from some of the photographs that came in over the last week, there was a direct deposit of a fair amount of soil into the Harpeth River after it filtered through the creek. So the goal is to slow that down. While I understand their desire to move forward, I understand we have a responsibility as well in order to enforce. And so the stop work order is not for the stabilization of the ground, not for soil and erosion control. That can continue. That's our desire, is that that continue ahead of almost everything else. There's also been expressed a concern about the pump house building and the need to water sod. I understand their desire to water sod, but I also understand that as long as they're having an impact across that road, which made it for a period of time impassable for some of the people who lived on it, that they need to address that. So in the trees, I agree with Blake, and that some of those trees need to be removed. Right now, there are areas of concentration of tree fall that started at the top of the hill with a very large tree, and it took out the 20 below it on the way to the road. So it is more concentrated in that area. And I know that not because of what I've been told, it's what I've observed with my own eyes. So that needs to be addressed as well. They are working with the property owners that live adjacent in order to accomplish that. So I, like you, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that's a fair statement that was made. I believe that we've done everything that we can to accommodate the project while serving the rest of the community as well.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate everything you're doing.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make sure that you didn't think they should be grading when they
Right.
should be.
Well, no, and
If
we've
it's-
had that discussion about what grading is allowed, because I think that's where it gets hard,
So why then
right?
would you make the statement that you felt that they were being denied the ability to do the grading and the things they need to do, if you already knew that?
Not necessarily us, but I think
No,
you're
Mr. Parrish.
referring to other,
I was saying that simply because my understanding is, I think it's hard because they want to abide by the rules
And we're
of
not
control. I understand.
Anything for soil and erosion control.
We're not stopping that.
To
Right.
include grading. And there was one other thing that originally it was mitigation tied to a 2-year event, but I thought that changed after the failure, did it?
Dan required them to step up above the 2-year event and some of the things
That's
that were
correct.
implemented the last time. When there's a failure, we will ask for more aggressive, which we did.
Okay.
And we'll ask for them every single time there's a failure, because if it doesn't work, it's irrelevant what year storm event it's tied to.
Right.
If it's failing, it's failing.
But right now, as far as designing the measures, it should not be based on a 2-year event anymore.
It should not. I mean, if a 2-year event is
Insufficient.
That's just called
common
rain.
sense perspective, but a 2-year event is not sufficient to control the issue.
It needs to be at a higher level.
to that point, and I'm sorry Mr. Hooper's not here tonight, but I know that we've updated, we record red line adjustments for each time we do updates, and he has an update that we just put into our SWIP box, and it reflects that upgraded
It does.
protection.
Okay, so that's where we're working.
I'm not sure what that quantification is, but it is documented in the red line drawings,
Thank you.
SWIP.
Well, would be sodding and planting the grass be part of the erosion control plan?
Absolutely,
It is.
that's, yeah, stabilization is a key part of actually the erosion and sediment control.
And to address that again, there has been no point in any stop or interaction with them that has deprived them of the ability to do that. They've been allowed to do that at every single phase.
If,
Okay, so the watering and the pump house thing is necessary for the
if I
grass,
can
the sod
kind
placement?
of, if I can expand on that just a little bit, what I foresee happening is the water supply that has been utilized at this point is sufficient for that first area, let's say the 60% that we have sodded to this point. Going forward with the water supply that is coming in from the Harpeth at some point, the bridge work, that work being completed would supply enough water for them to complete the rest of the 40% as far as grow in, if that makes sense.
While I
I'll make
understand
Stanley.
Mr. Curtis's question, I understand Jeff's comment. that he included, their engineer's comment that he put in there. We are entering the heaviest period of rain that we have in a year. Obviously, that's proven to be true. The long-term forecast indicates it's not going to let up anytime soon. The areas that they are installing soil and erosion control that lessen the impact going down that slope and towards the road have sufficient water supply to do what they need to do to keep that watered, fed, and grassed. So we don't have a problem with that. As they go up the project lane from the backside, South Harpeth, toward the playing halls and other things, there will be a need for watering of those greens at some point. But at this juncture, until we can find a solution to solve the problem that we have right now, it's really not a priority for us. It may be for the golf course to get those holes stabilized. I noted on every visit over the last month, it would be fair to say, a fair amount of erosion on the playing holes themselves, that they've also stabilized in different areas where the sand traps and other things were undercut with erosion. I see Blake nodding his head. We're trying to balance our requirement to enforce against their right to develop, against the rights of adjacent property owners not to be hampered. So it's a really delicate balance to get all of this done. But the pump house at this juncture is not critical to watering in what they need to water in to stabilize that ground. Is that a fair statement?
I truly don't know the numbers, but I can't say, I can't answer
Okay, then
that. It is totally separate from what we're doing golf course wise, if that makes sense.
Other questions? Okay, is there any reason to,
You know I'm gonna ask another question.
well, please do.
So really, what are we discussing here? You have a stop order, you're not prohibited from doing the things you need to do to stop the erosion. So what are we discussing here? Stop the erosion, be responsible, be accountable, as you've agreed and you say that you want to be. And I do appreciate everything you do, and I'm a golfer, I love golf, okay? It's not like I'm trying to be difficult, but we do need to have this balance, and this balance does need to require your accountability to take care of the issue and be proactive about it, so that we don't have to come back every month and discuss the same things over and over. Well, I did a report. Well, I did a report. That's great. That's yesterday. That doesn't help me.
I understand that.
Okay? What I need to know is that you're going to take care of this, and we're not going to see you next month. That would be delightful for everyone.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you, Warren. Anything else?
Last item on this is, you will note at the bottom of the report that was provided by Mr. Hooper today, they do continue to work with the county on improvements to South Harpeth. We did make a request to the county to have a sit down with the town so that we could discuss this mutual issue that we have for the ditching of the roads, and they elected not to take us up on that request. They expressed some concerns as to why they did not want to meet. That was shared in your packet as well. So for that, we have also informed the engineer for the project, Mr. Hooper, that he will still be required to submit those plans to this planning commission as required by the regional planning commission statutes at state level. It is my concerted opinion, after much discussion with our engineer and some discussion with Blake and some discussion with Jeff Hooper, that if those ditches were improved on that road to increase the water carrying capacity that a 6-inch ditch is not going to do, that it would greatly reduce the friction of this project. So it's my understanding there's some conversation going on between Mr. Hooper and the county's engineer. We are not privy to that conversation, but until those ditches or ditch lines are dug on the side of the road where the project exists, there's no place for the water to go. There's a depth of maybe 17, 18 inches in some spots, runs for a few feet, then it goes back to 6 inches. In addition to that, where the property line divides Mr. Gill from Miss Rose, there is a huge culvert. It's completely stopped up. It's stopped up for about 20 feet going onto that property. And I guess they are relaying that they've been told by TDEC they can't touch it because it's a blue line stream. That was an open culvert installed by the county to service that area of the road probably 30 years ago since that road's been paved.
And who's been instructed? You all or the county's been instructed? The county surely can clear it, can't they?
So the instructions to us from Jeff Hooper and the analysis of the jurisdictional waters, that's identified as blue line on Mr. Gill's property. The culvert itself goes from ditch to the opposite side of South Harpeth, which falls under the county jurisdiction. And at this time, we haven't been given permission to do any work or to assist with anything in that area.
So what I'm going to do is make a phone call to TDEC bright and early in the morning and find out what the inhibitor is to opening up this at least 20-inch culvert. I mean, it's a large culvert under that. It's the biggest culvert on the road. And it has a direct straight line path to the Harpeth River for disposition of rainwater. And it's stopped up. It's not serving anybody. So if they're being told that it can't be opened, it's been open for a period of 30 years that I know of, because the culvert was installed at least that long ago and served as disposition of water from that creek. So it's the first time I noticed it today, because the tree that was standing in front of it fell over and I can see it. So, but it's for a period of about, or for a distance of about 35 feet, it's completely blocked. And probably because someone needed to get from one side of the field to the other over a period of time, they just put dirt in it. So now there's no channel for the culvert to flow into anymore, it's blocked. And then you get to the open area where you can see that the water naturally flowed. So I will have that conversation with TDOT to see if we can't undo whatever's been said at this point. It's not that you're not allowed to work in a blue line stream, you are. But you have to get a permit, you have to go through the process to do it. And if opening that large culvert up will relieve the pressure on that road, that's the right thing to do.
And so with the ditching and the culvert, we're talking about all of this stuff that washes off the golf course, not ending up on the road and on adjacent properties.
That is correct.
If it has a place to go. It still goes into the river,
The
which is
water
not good.
will go.
Right.
Now, the goal is to keep the dirt out of the water
Right.
that's going to the river.
Right, so if the dirt's not solved, it's just going
Right.
straight to the river instead of on people's property and on a road.
That's correct.
So the dirt's one issue,
Water's the
place for
water's
everything
the
to
other,
go is
yeah.
another issue, right, okay.
And recently, tree fall, we can add that to
Yeah,
the list now. So.
dead fallen leaves are a big contributing factor there.
Sure. There
Yeah.
are. I took some pictures. Unfortunately, by the time I got done with the 6 inspections I did today, my phone died, so I can't even show it to you, because I don't have my charger. The last thing on this project is the letter from the engineer. I'm going to leave that for you to read at your leisure. This is kind of a one and done brief synopsis of what, who's responsible for what, who reports to who, as far as permitting and inspections go. So our engineer has thoughtfully prepared this for you so that you can have it as a guide for every project, not this project in particular. So that's in your packet as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, thank you both.
Thank
Oh,
you.
and I
Thank you very much.
apologize briefly, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, could you bring up that document for the inspection report? Or
Oh, this is the
report?
inspection report from?
It is not the inspection report, it's the report that was provided by the golf club, but it does contain, and there's some other things in there that I believe the first pictures came from a resident. We have those on, let's do it, yes, I want those first. These are also included in your packet, but I think if you did see them in scale that would make sense. All right, these are pictures that are furnished, and may I approach?
Yes, please.
By one of the neighboring property owners. Can you see this okay? Is there too much glare?
No, I see it. That's good.
As you can see, this is the issue we're all trying to work towards solving, is that much soil entering into the stream. Having said that, we'll cover later who's responsible for that.
That's-
Unfortunately, we don't have any impact. Right here is another. You can see the area.
And so that's the Harpeth River?
And that's the
This
dirt.
is South Harvard.
South Harvard, so if you will, next one, John, there is another. You can see the soil disposition. If you can go forward one more, that's back to that one, so we're done with that one. You can bring up,
So Sharon, just to make clear, that's not like muddy water, that is just soil that is sitting.
no, it's
No, it's
muddy
muddy
water.
Muddy water, it's
I
being
mean-
washed out.
Right,
Yeah,
but
you'll- this is the creek.
it's not silt, that's like,
No, this is silt.
okay,
That's
that's
what
what
this
I'm,
is.
yeah.
It's silt, and it's in the river here. So these breaches obviously are a concern to everybody, but as we'll discuss later, we are somewhat limited as a town in our enforcement of that creek. And I'll explain to you why, and I see Lori's already nodding her head. She worked for TDAC for a long time. If we can go to the report that Mr. Hooper provided. Just to the picture section. Thank you, John. All right, this first picture that's in your packet is just an aerial. This is to give you some idea of scale of the property. This is an aerial. These were provided by the golf club, and we really appreciated that. And then they go through showing current soil erosion control measures and proposed in these charts. And if you don't mind, I'm going to let you look at these at your leisure when you leave tonight. But you can see some of the measures that have been taken. And I'll send you some more photographs tomorrow so that you will get some context there. A great deal of energy and time has been expended on soil erosion control. I will make that statement. The reason I know that is because I see the difference every time I write it. So it's not that they're not making an effort, but in particular areas, the effort is simply not enough. Rather than putting just a straight silt fence, they need to put some stronger ones on that are weighted at the bottom and that have a filtering along the bottom of the silt fence. You can stretch this all day long, and when the water hits at a certain speed, it's just going to blow it up, it's going to go under it. So there are some improvements, which I believe Blake was referring to, in the type of material they're going to use that will do a much better job of controlling it. And so these pictures, as John scrolls through, are just pictures that were provided today. You'll get more tomorrow in an email. And I would like to say also that this three-part harmony, so to speak, of adjacent property owners, the city, and the project, we are somewhat limited as to what we can do with the stream itself. It's not under our jurisdiction, and we'll get to that later in our training protocol. So are there any other questions that I can answer for the planning commission?
Okay. So, that was an update, is what it was. We're not
Sorry.
taking action on that. So now, we're moving on to, we don't have anything else on golf club DBI except for some items that we have in training. Is that a true statement?
Sorry.
Yeah, except for items we have just in our training update
That is
that
correct.
pertain. We don't have any other DBI agenda items? Is that
We
what you're
do
saying?
not.
Okay.
That is all of those.
So anybody associated with Golf Club DBI, you're welcome to remain, but if you want to leave this time, you can too. We're going on to our bylaws now and some subdivision items.
Yes, sir. All of the, I sent these to Martha Brooke. They were revised after the last meeting. She had suggestions. Those were included in the bylaws that you have now. The only change to these is the insertion of the conflict of interest from the previous set of bylaws. That's the only change to them since you saw them last, other than what you adopted. So I went through the minutes, one at a time, inserted every single thing that you adopted from the minutes into these, and then Article 10, because it was omitted from the previous bylaws. So on this one, you can bless it, it's an administrative function. And if the planning commission will vote to approve all the changes from last time that were inserted, and then Article 10 for conflict of interest, this needs to be voted on as your bylaws. This is the final copy.
which was already in there.
Yes, sir.
And when we got the proposed revision, it had been left out.
Yes, sir.
It's been put back in.
Yes, sir.
So they are in our packet.
Yes, sir, they are in the packet right
In the back,
behind
right.
Oh, okay.
this lovely document. Which,
I make a motion to approve the bylaws as amended.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the amendment to the bylaws passes. Find where I am in this agenda. Okay. So that was item 9D. Now we're on new business. 10A, proposed minor subdivision, Harrison Clark, map 92, parcel 101, R1, low density.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. We advertise these because of the length of time that we have to advertise as opposed to staff review time. We have not received either one of these plats, so staff request is that we table this until the next meeting. For one, it's a matter of locating where the sewer line is, one of our other favorite subjects. It's having to be probed in order to be found, in order for the surveyor to put it on the plat for item A on East Kingston Springs Road. And then the other was referred to us by the county. It's in our growth area, and I have not received the plats on that either. So it was sent to us. The responses to both of these from the planning perspective went out 3 weeks ago. Did not get anything back on one because we don't know where the sewer is, so we could put it on there. For the other, simply did not get a return. I had an email yesterday asking me what else needed to be on the plat. So these need to be tabled. You can do them separately, since we're simply tabling, or you can do them as item A and item B.
I make a motion to table items A and B of new business.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, those are tabled. Next item, under 11 other, is our annual planning commission training, project plans, reviews, permits, local government liability.
Thank you. We're gonna try to make this mercifully brief, but it's something the planning commission does need. Here it's on the screen as well. I received this by permission from John Charlson with MTAS, who is their expert in this particular field. And I did so because I wanted to clarify the lines for who does what in a drainage situation. And I wanted you to have it as a reference for your planning books as well, so that when projects come up in the future, you will have this as sort of your drainage. And I get made fun of when I say this, it's your drainage Bible. Consult it frequently. So, in Tennessee, like most every other state, if you don't touch the ground, natural flow controls. The water's always run there, it's always gonna run there, it may widen, it may come faster sometimes, but it's natural slope. When you buy property next to natural slope and the water lands in your yard, you're on your own. It's natural flow, and it's actually codified in the law in Tennessee. So that's this drainage law in Tennessee. And it's referenced here, and you can see on the next page, these are the lawsuits that have challenged that law in Tennessee. One was heard, they're both appellate cases, and they were heard. People didn't like that definition of the law, so they challenged the law, and it's always been upheld in every case that's ever challenged it. You cannot complain about natural flow. It's not distinct to Tennessee, it's not distinct to America, it's pretty much the standard everywhere you go. It's sort of like if you buy a house next to the shooting range, you don't like the sound of gunfire, you bought a house next to the shooting range, it got there first, you're on your own. So, the rule is easier to state than to apply, but generally a landowner, property owner, cannot impede the flow of water. That's why you see so many westerns where they make a dam. People get upset, right, because they're taking all the water. You can't increase the volume, the natural volume of the water. what flowing before can be allowed to flow, but you can't produce any more to contribute to it. That's increasing. And you can't increase the velocity. That means that if you do certain things to the ground, you will increase the speed with which the water exits the property. That's velocity. You're not allowed to do that either. It kind of mirrors the FEMA flood ordinance that you've been trained on, width, speed, that sort of thing. Same thing. Okay, the design engineer, unfortunately, is the guy on the hot seat. That's the way the law is interpreted. The design engineer on any project is responsible to ensure that drainage, erosion, and sediment control problems are avoided during the construction of the project. Makes common sense. You're the guy that drew the pictures, now make it work on the ground. Drainage law, approval or acceptance, and I think this is important for people in general to understand, and particularly for the public to understand. Approval or acceptance by the town, in this case we're going to insert town instead of local government, does not relieve the design engineer of professional liability or ethical responsibility for his project. The buck stops on the engineer's desk. That's why you see one come with every large project. So it doesn't excuse it. So then it goes on to, designs are normally reviewed for compliance, which we spent many, many hours as a planning commission, as a staff, in reviewing this project. Many hours, hundreds of them. So the review for compliance with required standards, which we use, right? We have standards for stormwater, we have standards for soil erosion, the state has the same. And I think what's critically important is the second sentence in this slide. The government reviewer takes no responsibility for the outcome of the project as designed. Why? Because it's designed by a professional engineer who says this will work, and if it doesn't, we'll make it right. We don't take liability for that. We work with them, and just as a simplification of TDAC law, projects this large, or projects in general, are allowed to fail under their rules for issuing a permit. You're allowed to fail. You're also required after that failure to take next steps to address the failure. But they are allowed to fail. Will it fail again? Probably. It's a very large project. We do everything we can to ensure that we limit the damage as much as we can and address it appropriately under the scope of what we're allowed to do as a town. So, the ultimate responsibility and liability rests on the design engineer who seals the plan. It's pretty simple language. Tennessee Code annotated states that all government entities are immune from suit. In other words, we can't be sued if we've done due diligence. We cannot be sued over this project. For injury caused by the dangerous or defective condition of any public structure, dam, reservoir, or other public improvement, we also are immune from suit by any employee. So let's say I missed something in the review. You can't be sued because I missed it, because it's an honest mistake. Only a deliberate action creates that. So, the issuance, denial, suspension, or revocation of or by failure to issue, deny, suspend, or revoke a permit, license, certificate, approval, or So we're immune from those things because we're doing due diligence on behalf of the public. Tennessee Code annotated states that all government entities are guaranteed immunity for suit for injury caused by negligent act or omission of any employee within the scope of his employment. So if I guys are saying, failure to make an inspection or by reason of making an inadequate or negligent inspection on any property. Do we strive to do that? Never. We strive to do the best inspection we can, provide a report, consult with a design professional, our engineer, give advice to the applicant, and attempt to move on. Our goal is not to stop projects. Our goal is not to prohibit projects. Our goal is to make sure they fall within the confines of the permit. It's a simple process. The city generally has no responsibility for drainage problems among private landowners unless the city itself has violated the natural flow rule. What's that mean? We are not digging anywhere as a city on any property to build any project. If we were, John and I would be having a conversation about what the city's responsibilities are under the law for doing that, as we have on other projects within the city. But we do not inherit responsibility for the actions between private property owners. So while the private property owner may allege that they're damaged, and in some cases they are not party to that. We are simply required to do due diligence, do the inspections, and take the appropriate actions, which we do every single time. So far, we have done 6 of them at about 35 hours of inspection time on this project. In the absence of such a violation by the city, we did not dig a hole or cause any water to flow as a city. The city has no obligation to maintain the integrity of the drainage. We can't maintain it on someone else's property, and no right to go on to the properties in question. So let's say that a guy says, my neighbor's dumping all this water before he put that pool in my yard. We don't have any authority to go over and correct that. None. We are prohibited by law from going on that property to correct the issue between the property owners. Okay? We have no responsibility for drainage problems among private landowners unless the city has violated the natural flow rule, which we have not. So, an exception to this is if a developer violates the subdivision regulations or the stormwater ordinance. Those are the 2 things we regulate these things with, along with soil and erosion control. If we don't seek compliance, we then expose ourselves. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? As long as we're pursuing the path to getting it done the right way, we're immune. When we stop doing that, we're not. So, the city, other than that exception, if we don't make an attempt to rectify the situation, not only does the city have no responsibility in the case of drainage problems between private landowners, the city has no legal standing in court. In other words, if they start suing each other, we can't go into the court and weigh in one way or the other. We're prohibited from doing that. We have avenues to address violations, and we take those. So we're done with this part of it. The last thing that I would like to say is I want to clarify who does what on sites. If it's creek, body of water recognized by the state, they have a list of them, very comprehensive list. They're blue line or they're not, they're ditched, whatever they are. 35 feet buffer on either side of that body of water, whether it's creek or blue line or the river, is controlled by the state of Tennessee. We don't have a dog in the fight. So from 35 feet from the top of the bank of that waterway backwards, we're responsible for that. If we're allowing work that goes to that edge and then goes into the creek, we need to rectify that. But we can't enforce within that boundary. We don't have any authority. Just go ahead.
Is it the shoreline? Because the shoreline varies. Is it not to the center of the water?
For creeks, not rivers, but creeks. For creeks, it's 35-foot buffer on either side. That's what the state has established for a creek. Now, for the river, we have zero control because that's shared between TDAC and the Corps of Engineers. We don't touch those at all. So for a project such as the one we're discussing today, 35 feet on either side of the top of the bank, wherever that lies, whether it's straight, crooked, rises, falls, whatever, we have no enforcement authority at all, none. So what we're required to do is when a failure occurs, we're required to report to the permitting agency, which in this case is TDAC. That's what we do. We contact them. We've actually done one joint inspection with them. So that's what we do in that particular case. So I wanted just to make sure that everybody understood as we strive as a group, and I mean as a group, we have the developer, we have the property owners who lie adjacent, we have the town. and we have the state. We're all involved in the same project in one way or another. So as we strive to get compliance and the least amount of damage possible on this project, it behooves us to understand what our roles are and that we're diligent in what we do. And I would say that conducting 6 inspections inside of a month after every single rain, photographing what we see, relaying it back to you, constitutes due diligence. While I understand the interruption to the progress of the course, I also understand that we are limited as to what we can do in the stages in which we approach it. So every time we come back, we increase what they need to do. Because we also can't cause them to spend money unnecessarily. We're prohibited from doing that as well. So you go to the next step up, and the next step up, whatever gets the job done. So if I require them to build a retaining wall 12 feet high all the way around the perimeter of the property, that would be excessive. So then I would be guilty of requiring them to spend unnecessary funds. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Okay. So any questions about your stormwater? I know it's a lot to entail, but I thought it would give context to this discussion.
No, it's very good, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Is that the end of that item?
That's the end of that item.
Okay, so I just want to explain to the commission the last item, which is not necessary right now. But because we have had adjacent landowners who've been very frustrated throughout this process, one of their frustrations has been they try to come in during the public community forum section, and they only have a few minutes to speak, and they want to say more. And in the course of the meeting, we're not going to have a dialogue with them because we have to conduct the business of the planning commission. So to take some pressure off that, I put in an item, if there were members here who were adjacent landowners, and I don't, are there any adjacent landowners here? No. So if there were any here, I wanted them to invite them to an open discussion as an agenda item where I would list for them that we're aware of their whole list of concerns and as adjacent landowners and why. I would ask them to clarify if they felt there was anything that we did not know. So I would want them to talk. And then I would ask you, the commissioners, I would tell them and then ask you to input if you want, that all of us are volunteers who are concerned for them and all the citizens as we're operating within the state law as a planning commission. So I wanted to have that conversation with them so they could feel heard and so they didn't feel like, you know, they're in a straitjacket and they keep exploding every time something happens because they may feel we don't hear them. So that was the, pardon me?
I think he feels that way that left here, that he's just.
He does. And I wasn't going to get into a long discussion like I just had now with you all in the middle of the meeting and then have them say, well, what about, so they didn't see it on the agenda, they didn't come, but I suggest, depending on what's going on in communications, possibly we have it on next month, just again, in case we have a bunch of adjacent landowners here, depending on the circumstances.
Or at least mention to him at first that that's going to be on the agenda.
That's a good point.
Instead of leaving.
Yeah, instead of leaving it to them to see. So next time, if it seems that there'll be some here, I would put this in on the
Sure,
agenda.
will be here.
Yeah,
I would think it would be a good idea, just in general, to have, through the life of this project, have this standing item.
that's a good idea.
Just put it under issues of concern, and when it comes up on the agenda, as we work our way through this, then they can stand up and have that discussion. There are a couple of things that kind of hamper our responses to them. One, they're residents of the county, and they've been turned a deaf ear in county. I don't know that TDAC is particularly responsive to them as well. Don't know, but I mean, they're addressing their concerns. The last inspection that was done by TDAC jointly with the city was done because of the complaints of the adjacent property owners. So they're being heard. I don't know that they quite understand that we are straitjacketed, to use the chairman's term, to a degree as to what we can do to respond. And when they interact with us, we attempt to respond to them, and in many cases that results in some more response that we can't address, or some more response that we
Sure.
can't address.
And it was just so they could hear from us, that
Right.
we hear them.
We hear them,
That
they
we're
hear us,
operating within
we move on.
the state laws as far as the operations of the thing.
So the culvert question about, that's a TDEC, they're in
County.
charge of that?
It's, the culvert itself was a culvert, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, please.
The culvert that I'm referring to was installed some years ago by the county
Okay,
on
so
under the road.
installed by the county.
Right, and it drains, was supposed to drain into this ditch line that you can visibly see.
Right.
But the first 35 feet or so of it now are so dirted in and silted in, I would imagine, because of agricultural activity and the need to get from one field to the other field, it's just easier to dirt over it and drive over it, so it no longer flows. So it's useless to the
So your
drainage
call
of the-
tomorrow that you mentioned that you're gonna
I
make,
will.
are you calling the county or are you calling the TDEC?
No, I'm calling TDAC because it's my understanding that TDAC has informed them, as they relate to you, it's been relayed to them, that they're not allowed to touch that. Once you open a drainage way, TDAC's a very powerful entity, but once you open a drainage way, you can't then close it off. So that has been a drainage way for a period of excess of 30 years. How do I know that? Because that was the last time the county adequately paved the road. It was 30 years ago, which is true of most county roads in rural jurisdictions. I'm sorry if I'm too blunt for folks, let me apologize up front, because I usually call it like I see it. That road, like many county roads, there's not excessive funds to pave them. There are probably 25 roads in the county right now that haven't been paved for more than 40 years. It's just what it is. It's not a state aid road, and they can't find it in their budget, and if they raise taxes, so it comes to the courthouse and screams at them. So, you know, the balance, always. It was an open culvert. They don't install culverts to nowhere, they're expensive.
So your supposition is that maybe TDEC could give you permission to clear it?
I'm going to ask TDAC why they don't want it open, is not gonna be my
Okay, I got you.
question. And to tell them that they are contributing to the issue on the road.
Right.
The other thing that we have attempted to do is to sit down with the county, to have a discussion, to get them to understand that deepening those ditches is gonna help substantially with the flow of water not going to the other side of the road, which is the source for the complaints. The other thing that you will hear about later on in the project briefly, so that you can all go home too, is that end of South Harpeth past the project going towards the bridge that's south, and going towards the bridge that's being, slopes down. The bridge is now elevated 4.5 feet higher than it was before, which means the road is going to slope down. The location where the lift is on the Doris property, all of that water is going to converge at that point and go onto that property. So when the road designs that we're asking for, one of the things we would ask for is, for crying out loud, let the road slope the other way so that you're not bringing the problem to a point where it's going to create another issue in the future. It's their road, they get to grade it more than they want to.
The county comes by and cleans out ditches all the time.
The county cleans them out, Mr. Thompson, I agree with you, we've seen them out there. We've also seen them ride by and say, it looks good to me, and drive on.
Yeah.
We met them doing that a couple of times. The issue is they're so shallow, and there's so much water coming off that hill, it's not able to convey it. So it's going across the road to the properties on the other side. The 4 culverts that are together, while that sounds like a lot, they're all, what, 16 inch? 16, and they're back to back to back to back. Well, if you had one large culvert, it would be way more effective than splitting it up into 4 culverts separated by inches across that road. And then the width that it's going into on the creek on the other side is a little bit hampered by the bend that occurs about 70 feet downstream. So those are some things that if the county were willing to entertain ditching And minor improvements like a culvert, it's not like you're hurting the surface of a 35-year-old road to cut across it, put a bigger culvert in. And then there's some areas where the culverts are 6 inches in size. How much water can you carry through there?
Trying to breathe through a straw.
So again, if the water is controlled on the project side,
Our sewer's
there's
only 4, right?
improvements made to the road in that ditch line, because there's not a ditch for most of the road on the other side. And it's just, it's because roads were put in as necessities with no forethought, what's gonna happen in the future, no improvements were ever made. It was paved that way, it was always that way, we'll pave it that way again. But it needs to be done, because that will help some with the water carriers passing, and will also keep it from going across the road, which is the source of it.
Any other questions for Sharon?
So,
No other
I
questions?
have one question.
Yes, sir.
So why did this whole thing happen? Why did this whole dilemma happen? Did
Which
we just
dilemma?
take too much dirt at one time to create all this stuff?
We have had, over a period of the last 9 weeks, 4 periods of excessively heavy rain, which not normal rain, for this time of year. Because there is so much land disturbing activity going up on this rise, and one day we should all get in a minibus and take a ride out there just so you can see the project. It's a very steep slope coming off the back end of the project. There's a lot of dirt activity going on at the top of the hill, right at the top. The ditch is about that deep in most spots where it comes off the hill. It's tree lined, soft soil, lots of rain. That's what's creating the dilemma. And it's happening over and over and over again. So as they control different areas of the project with stormwater controls, then they move to another area, another issue surfaces. It's 243.5 acres of grade that are gonna occur. So while the engineer took umbrance with a whack-a-mole, that's the way our engineer described it. You plug one hole, another one surfaces, depending on what you're doing and where you're doing. So it's a fluid process to a degree. And as I relayed to the planning commission,
Liquid process.
TDAC, well, and TDAC allows them to fail. They do. But they also require them to clean it up. So there's an inordinate amount of soil lately that's going into it.
Okay, any other questions, or do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.